Hi everyone, I'm going to try to make this lecture series fairly quick because it's not really my area of expertise. The way that these transfer classes are written for critical thinking and writing is that we have to teach a section on critical writing. And then if you took the English version of that, which I think is critical writing and reasoning the other way around, then they would have to teach some philosophy stuff in it. And we're both kind of required to teach outside of our comfort zone. And so I'm teaching this kind of quickly, not because I don't think it's important, but just because even though I do consider myself a good writer, I've had to write dissertations and things that are published and all that kind of stuff, but I don't consider myself a good writing professor. Just like maybe probably a lot of your English teachers are very good critical thinkers, but maybe they have a harder time teaching critical thinking themselves, because being good at something doesn't just automatically mean you can teach it. So anyway, I'm going to go through this information on argumentative essays. I hope it's helpful to you. You're going to be writing your own argumentative essay for this class very soon. It's broken up into 3 parts. But let me just dive right in and talk to you a little bit about it. Argumentative essays, unsurprisingly, are essays that make good arguments. You probably would know that just from the title. Just like a good argument is one in which the premises support the conclusion, an argumentative essay is one in which the body of the essay supports the thesis of the, or theses, but usually thesis of the essay by giving reasons for believing it. And so in other words, you're like an argument, you're using premises to get to a conclusion to make sure that conclusion is good. So in an argumentative essay, you're using the body of the essay to prove your point, to make your point. So it's really an argument. Now, making an argument, as you know, is more than simply listing your opinions on something. It's kind of carefully examining competing hypotheses in which each one is considered, tested, and compared to the other. So the writer of this kind of essay, an argumentative essay, should attempt to be careful, fair, and dispassionate. That's really important with these types of essays and academic papers in general. You should always attempt to be free of really strong emotion or opinions. You want to reason well. In philosophy and in critical thinking, we disagree with people all the time, and people disagree with us, and you have to learn to do that well and not take it personally, because you want to believe true things, and maybe somebody criticizing something that you're saying has a good point. And so with these essays, even if you've got a very strong opinion on them, you don't want to be very emotional with them. You want to be kind of straightforward and describe your view dispassionately, objectively, fairly, and you want to be fair to all sides of the opinion. Sorry, my phone's going off, and you're probably thinking it's yours. The primary task of this type of essay is to give rational support for a claim. The primary task is not to persuade somebody. You can write persuasive essays. That's a different type of thing. In a persuasive essay, you can use anything you want to persuade somebody. You can manipulate. I mean, it's not good in an academic one. You can threaten somebody. You can make strong emotional appeals. You can make them cry. You can pull on their heartstrings. All of that's kind of fair game to be persuasive. You can persuade anybody. You can say, believe me or I'll beat you up. That's persuasive, maybe. Not for me. I'm a little wimp. But it could be if I were a big guy. That it would be persuasive. But we're not looking to persuade. We can hope that a good argument will persuade somebody, that people are persuaded by good reasoning, but that's kind of a secondary aim for our essays. Our essays are simply to make a good argument. Now, this does not have to mean, it should not mean, that argumentative essays are boring. You might say, well, if I can't give opinion, if I can't be emotional, if I can't do that kind of stuff, if I'm not trying to persuade, then it's just this boring thing. But it's not. You should always attempt to make your essays interesting to your readers. You should definitely employ techniques from your comp classes to move the essay along and keep it interesting. But your primary focus is always going to be the strength of the argument, not the strength of your rhetoric, your ability to persuade, your ability to say things. Though having both good rhetoric and good arguments would be ideal for a paper, and that would make it interesting for me to read, whoever your reader is, and interesting for you to write, and it would be a good argument still. So let me kind of tell you a little bit about the basic essay structure. The following structure is a good general guideline. Good writers will know how to bend and sometimes even break the rules. I'm turning my phone off or silencing it so it won't keep interrupting. A good writer will sometimes know how to bend or break the rules, but you have to know the rules before you can bend or break them. So this is just a general guideline, a rule of thumb. These are kind of how you structure your essay. There's 5 components to a good argumentative essay. Again, you can bend and break these rules, but these are good to follow. You have the introduction, and I'm talking about each of these in detail. You have your thesis statement, your argument supporting the thesis and the thesis statement, your assessment of objections to the thesis and or the supporting statements, and I'll talk about that, that's really important, and your conclusion. So let me break these down and talk about those 5 parts. Introduction, thesis statement, the argument supporting the thesis, the assessment of objections to the thesis and your supporting statements, and the conclusion. The first is the introduction. Now this is usually no more than 1 paragraph of 3 to 5 sentences. Yes, you can break that rule, but I personally hate long introductions. When you're writing your introduction, you want to get the reader's attention, in this case mine, and there are good and bad examples and techniques for grabbing somebody's attention. One mistake that I really, really hate, I just cannot stand it every time I read it, is when students use hyperbole, exaggeration. I always get papers that make these really exaggerated opening claims. They'll say, in the history of the world, this topic has been the most debated, and all that kind of stuff. I hate that. I really do. I think that these things are interesting in themselves. Now that's my coffee pot. I think these things are interesting in themselves, and so I don't need exaggeration for it. So don't try to capture me with exaggeration. You can have good techniques. This isn't an exhaustive, but you could provide some kind of startling statistic that has to do with your paper. You could make some kind of unexpected claim, and then I'm thinking, how are they making this claim? How are they going to prove this claim? You could paint a vivid picture of the problem or give an example. These are all really good ways to grab somebody's attention. I really don't like starting with a quote. I don't find them interesting, but that's another way that people do grab attention. The attention grabber that you write, however, must relate to the topic. Don't just put a filler in the paper. Don't just put an exciting story that has nothing to do with the paper. It needs to relate, and you probably figured that out. Also, in this introduction paragraph, you want to give a little background of the topic. Explain why it's important without using hyperbole, without using exaggeration. Explain why it's important and explain the problem the essay is aiming to solve and how you're going to do it. I like a little road map in the beginning to say, I'm going to argue this and then this way. First I'll do this, and then I'll do this, and then I'll do that. Now your English teacher says that's boring. Probably philosophers would probably make the world's worst mystery novelist. We would say, in this mystery novel, I plan to prove that the butler did it, and we'd give it all away right at the beginning. Your English teachers would say, don't do that, but this is a different type of essay, and this is a philosophy class. So you can just state right at the beginning, and you should state in your thesis statement right at the beginning what you're trying to prove, and then the steps you'll take to prove it. Be brief. It's the important work of your paper is your argument, not the introduction. And so don't make the introduction long. Again, I like really, really short introductions, and I like you to jump right into the argument. I kind of get bothered by long introductions, so keep that in mind. Now let me say also in the introduction you're going to have your thesis statement, and the thesis statement is one short, specific, focused sentence that gives the claim you're going to be defending or arguing for in the essay. So it's one short sentence explaining the claim that you're going to spend the rest of the essay trying to prove. It's usually the last sentence of your first paragraph of your introduction, and it shows the reader what the paper will discuss and guides everything that follows. That is a very, very important thing, the thesis statement, and I'll mention a little bit more about it later. In terms of the body of the essay, this is your support of the thesis. You can think of each paragraph or each small group of paragraphs, if you need more than one, as a premise that supports the thesis statement. So, you know, we've been talking about arguments, and arguments have a conclusion and a premise. The thesis is like your conclusion, and each of the paragraphs in your argumentative essay are in some way going to support the thesis statement, and each of those paragraphs or groups of paragraphs are going to have little mini theses at the top that you support with the other lines in the paragraph. So, in other words, every paragraph starts with a little topic, which is kind of a mini thesis, and then all the lines in that paragraph support that thesis, and then that mini thesis supports the overall thesis, if that makes sense to you. Support each premise of your argument with things like expert opinions, statistics, examples, evidence, whatever it takes to make a good argument in there. You want to make one point or a subpoint per paragraph, and each point must support the thesis. So just try to keep it very simple, very terse. Philosophy essays, philosophy dissertations, for example, are usually generally short. If you were to write a dissertation in English, if you were getting a PhD in English, and you wrote a dissertation, it'd probably be like 300 pages or more. Philosophy one is usually about 150 to, it can be longer, but 150 to 200 pages, because philosophers like to be very, very brief and terse and concise. And that's what I'm looking for. So every paragraph with one point. Also in the body of the essay, you wanted to deal with objections. Now, this is extremely important when writing an argumentative essay. One of the cognitive, if you'll remember, one of our cognitive hindrances to critical thinking is confirmation bias. And this is a major issue in an argumentative essay. You're going to be tempted to only offer support for your claim. You're only going to want to make the best case without considering disconfirming evidence. Remember, that's the problem with confirmation bias. We ignore evidence to the contrary. A good essay, however, is going to look, a good argumentative essay is going to look for disconfirming evidence and seriously consider it and talk about it and discuss its strength. So what you want to do is look for the best pieces of evidence against your thesis, explain those objections fairly as if that opponent of your view would hear it and say, yes, that's exactly what I think, that's exactly my objection to your argument, and then give careful thought and consideration to it and explain why you don't agree with it. This can come up in your argumentative essay in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's good to deal with an objection right as they naturally appear in your case. So, for example, say that you know of an important objection to one of your supporting paragraphs. It may be a good idea just to deal with it right there so that a critical reader of your paper doesn't dismiss that support that you're giving for it, because all that's on her mind is the objection that she has. And so maybe it's good to clear up objections right then. Sometimes it's better to group all of the objections into one section and deal with each of those in turn. It's just a kind of a matter of a style. So you might write all of your support, and then you might consider the objections as a separate section of your paper and deal with the objections separately. Or you might deal with objections while you're going along in the paper. That's just a stylistic thing. Lastly, your conclusion typically restates the thesis, even if it's not in the exact words. It sometimes will summarize the primary support for your argument. It sometimes will restate the importance of the topic. Maybe it describes the implications of the argument. Maybe it challenges the reader to act. There's a lot of different ways you can write a good conclusion. All right, I'm going to go back now and talk about thesis statements and other things in the next videos, but this is just kind of a good general overview of what I'm looking for and what a good argumentative essay is.